we'll continue our exploration that Yashodhaka started last week in this particular parable, as Dharma was saying, from the sutra, the White Lotus Sutra, and then he said Sutra God Light, from the White Lotus Sutra, which is a really important sutra from the later phase, the sort of second phase in the development of Buddhism. And really interestingly, it takes this approach not of doctrinal teachings, but of parables. It tells a whole series of parables, which in itself is really curious, isn't it? It's not what you expect. You expect that you're going to get the Four Noble Truths or the Eightfold Path, something at least with a number in it from Buddhism. But here we're getting parables. So why is that? That's what's this particular approach about? So it comes from a period where Buddhism was quite developed. It was quite established. People knew what Buddhism was, and that is a danger. That is a danger. It's very difficult, isn't it, to explain something to someone if they think they already know it. It's kind of impossible. Yeah, I know that. Well, that was the position in a way that Buddhism was in, and that's the sort of audience, at least in part, that this sutra is trying to address. There's an earlier phase in an earlier section where the Buddha says he's going to teach the White Lotus Sutra, and 500 disciples just walk out in a huff. They go off in a huff. There cannot be more to learn. Well, it's trying to address that sort of mindset. And actually, the thing is, that sort of mindset is also quite often our mindset, my mindset. In some ways, you're in a bit of an advantage not knowing anything about Buddhism in some ways, or knowing less about Buddhism, because at least there's that sort of openness. And so that's where you get these parables. I think it's a brilliant sort of, it's a little stroke of genius, really, to tell parables, because parables are brilliant, aren't they? You set out kind of just listening to the parable, already thinking you know something, and then in the process of it, it speaks to you. It kind of gets through. It gets under the radar of, I know this, under the radar of what you know. It speaks more sort of directly. It starts to resonate with your experience. So that's why the Buddha in this sutta gives us parables. It's to get under the radar. Suddenly we're just kids again, aren't we? Kind of listening to this story, but it sort of gets through. It gets through our sort of illusions to intellectual sophistication, which actually can prevent us, oddly, from really hearing the Dharma. So, yeah, that's a bit about this particular sutta and the approach, this perhaps slightly surprising approach of using parables to teach the Dharma. We've heard the parable of the burning house a few weeks back, but now we're on to the parable, as Arthasiddhi said, of the rain cloud, which is a beautiful parable. In a way to sort of summarize this, you could say we stop short of putting the spiritual life into practice when we mistake intellectual understanding for true knowledge. That's the issue, or the sort of the danger of knowing Buddhism. See what I mean? That we stop short of actually put it into practice because we mistake that intellectual understanding for true knowledge. And you have to catch yourself doing this. You can catch yourself talking about Buddhism, and in the same moment realize you're not doing what you're talking about. It's a very disconcerting experience. Or perhaps you're returning to a particular teaching that you think you know. I had this. It's one of the great things about teaching the Dharma, that you return and return and return to, basic or fundamental teachings. We were doing a class on the hindrances, and I was being led through, and I realized there was a hindrance going on in my mind, and had been, for months, without me realizing it, because I know the hindrances, I know that teaching. But there it was, unrecognized, and all I needed was to be back in a beginner's class, as it were, to start to discover the Dharma, rediscover the Dharma. So in a way, with the Dharma, we're always rediscovering it. That's kind of the nature of the Dharma. So that's why we need these teachings that sort of get in underneath the radar of our sort of assumed, our intellectual understanding. Yeah. So that's not, I don't want to completely dismiss intellectual understanding, because that is kind of helpful, isn't it? Understanding what the Buddha's getting at. But it's a starting point. That's the point. It's just a starting point that we can actually settle down into thinking that we know. It's not a starting point. We're there. We've arrived. Great. So what I'll do is I'll read this parable. It's just a short section. The Lotus Sutra is a huge, long thing, but I'll just read this excerpt, this parable. And as Dharmasiddhi was saying, the parable of the rain cloud is a bit culturally specific, isn't it? I thought, what on earth are they talking about? The parable of the rain cloud? That sounds like a bad thing. But yeah, you need to be Indian. You need to get inside the Indian mind. So Indians are hugely relieved when they see on the horizon, eased when they see on the horizon the clouds starting to roll in. For the farmers, if they're a few days late, it means, destruction. Just a few days late. So we need to have that. We need to enter into that sort of conditioning and put aside our English conditioning. And then there's the David Attenboroughs, isn't there, of those images that we see in Africa, the parched, desertified kind of landscape. And then the rain comes in, and it's like a miracle, isn't it? That suddenly it's green again. You sort of almost don't believe it, do you? Before it happens. So that's the world that this parable emerges from. So here goes. It is like unto a great cloud rising above the world, covering all things everywhere. A gracious cloud full of moisture. Lightning flames flash and dazzle. Voice of thunder vibrates afar, bringing joy and ease to all. The sun's rays are veiled and the earth is cooled. The cloud lowers and spreads as if it might be caught and gathered. Its rain everywhere equally descends on all sides, streaming and pouring unstinted, permeating the land. On mountains, by rivers, in valleys, in hidden recesses, there grow the plants, trees, and herbs. Trees both great and small, the shoots of the ripening grain, grapevine and sugarcane, fertilized are these by the rain and abundantly enriched. The dry ground is soaked, herbs and trees flourish together from the one water which issues from that cloud. Plants, trees, thickets, forests, according to need, receive moisture. All the various trees, lofty, medium, low, each according to its size, grows and develops roots, stalks, branches, leaves, blossoms, and fruits in their brilliant colours. Wherever the one rain reaches, all become fresh and glossy. According as their bodies, forms, and natures are great or small, so the enriching rain, though it is one and the same, makes each of them flourish. In like manner, also, the Buddha appears here in the world, like unto a great cloud, universally covering all things. And having appeared in the world, he, for the sake of the living, discriminates and proclaims the truth in regard to all laws. The great, holy, world-honored one, among the gods and humans, and among the other beings, proclaims abroad this word: I am the Tathagata, the most honored among humans. I appear in the world like unto this great cloud, to pour enrichment on all parched living beings, to free them from their misery, to attain the joy of peace, joy of the present world, and joy of nirvana. Gods, humans, and everyone, hearken well with your mind. Come you here to me, behold the peerless honored one. I am the world-honored one who cannot be equaled. To give rest to every creature, I appear in the world, and to the hosts of the living, preach the pure law, sweet as dew. The one and only law of deliverance and nirvana. With one transcendent voice, I proclaim this truth, ever taking the great vehicle as my subject. Upon all, I ever look everywhere impartially, without distinction of persons, or mind of love or hate. I have no predilections, nor any limitations. Ever to all beings, I preach the law equally. As I preach to one person, so I preach to all. Ever I proclaim the law, engaged in naught else. Going, coming, sitting, standing, never am I wearied of pouring its copious on the world. Like the all-enriching rain, on honoured and humble, high and low, law-keepers and lawbreakers, those of perfect character and those of imperfect, orthodox and heterodox, quick-witted and dull-witted. Equally, I rain the law rain unwearyingly. So that's the parable of the rain cloud. I hope you managed to reach beyond English, French, possibly north of France anyway, conditioning. It's quite beautiful, isn't it? That sense of the rain reaching everybody impartially, everybody kind of flourishing. So how is it that the Dharma is like that? You know, isn't the Dharma just one religion that speaks to a small percentage of the population? How is it that the Dharma actually kind of can do that, can reach all sort of impartially? Is that the nature of the Dharma? How is that the nature of the Dharma? Well, I just want to give a couple of examples and then sort of conclude that question and then leave us a bit of time to explore in groups, explore this all in groups. But one example that I was thinking of, actually this was Arthasiddhi's example, is that experience of hearing a Dharma talk. Sometimes you're sitting listening to a Dharma talk and you hear the Dharma spoken directly to you personally, and you cannot work out how they know all this about you. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but I've had that experience, and I've heard other people having that experience to the extent that sometimes I've heard people want to go and check and actually do that with the speaker. Were you talking about me? You know, I know we know each other a bit. Were you, angling this to me? And they weren't. But it's of the nature of the Dharma to speak to people personally, and sometimes quite differing people in the same talk can be reached and spoken to. And when you have that experience, it sort of confounds, you can't quite make sense of it. It sort of confounds your sense of separate identity, this sense that we just have that we are separate identities that, never thought through, but it's just a sort of, it's built into the way we experience life as unenlightened beings. But how is it that this talk spoke so personally to me, and also spoke so personally to that other person? So that's just an example of how the Dharma somehow can sort of does speak impartially. The other example that particularly came to my mind was just Sangha, actually. If you spend time in the Sangha, if you go on retreat, if you hang around the center, you end up seeing people of such differing temperaments. Sometimes you can't quite believe, sometimes I've certainly done this myself, you sort of got a notion of what a Buddhist is, and then somebody turns up to the center who doesn't fit that, doesn't fit your category. And you think, but how, these lot are all Buddhists, but how is that person doesn't fit in, but they do, there they are. The Dharma is speaking to them. I think for me, one of the most startling experiences of this was on my first retreat. There were two people leading it, two order members, Amoghavamsa and Stirananda. This was up in Sheffield. And I'd actually been doing a bit of study with them, so I knew them in advance of the retreat. And they're so different in every way, other than the fact that they both grew up in working class, both from working class backgrounds. They're so different. I mean, they look different. So Stirananda was clearly worked out. He's sort of well-built guy, probably in about his 40s, late 40s or something like that then. And Amoghavamsa, hadn't done any exercise in kind of years. Clearly he was a kind of extraordinary shape. His doctor told him that the wrong things were holding him up. He's got his shoulders are kind of, the wrong muscles are actually kind of holding him up. So he's an extraordinary shape. He's very, very tall. And then if you give him a hug, he's got this kind of marshmallow girth. Extraordinary sort of experience. So they look kind of totally different. Stirananda's very much an introvert. He's very, very, that sort of straight away. He's friendly, but clearly an introvert. Amoghavamsa is really, really big-hearted, gregarious, kind of life and soul sort of a character. Very, very good with people. Really brilliant with people. So they're very different in that respect of introvert, extrovert. Stirananda takes what he says and what he thinks very, very seriously. He's very, very precise with what he thinks and what he says. Amoghavamsa plays the clown. He'll kind of throw every sort of preconception of what a Buddhist is. Actually, that's going too far. But he plays the clown. He'll kind of send himself up. He'll put you completely at your ease. So I was there on the retreat, kind of basically waiting for them to fall out. You know, how can someone who plays the clown kind of develop a working relationship with someone who takes themselves really seriously? How is that going to work? So every instance where Mogavamsa said something, I was like that, watching for the response, you know, waiting for the reaction. And it never came. It never came. Yeah, so there was something that they shared that completely confounded my sense of sort of separate identity. This is the way Mogavamsa is. This is the way Stirananda is. There was just they're like sort of completely different shapes. There's no point of contact. They haven't got a single sort of point of contact at the level of temperament, even interests actually, and even the way they practice the Dharma. Very, very different. So I was just repeatedly astonished on the retreat, and I've sort of never forgotten it. There's something else. It just left me with the sense there's something else going on here. And Sangha, that's just an example. That was my sort of first retreat and my first sort of example of what can happen in Sangha. All of your sense of how people get on is sort of wrong-footed. So it's in this way that somehow there's something else going on. The Dharma is sort of speaking impartially, irrespective of temperament, and somehow enabling, you know, they're communicating, they're speaking through the Dharma, they're meeting through the Dharma. So yeah, it wasn't even, you know, you can kind of pick up on this, can't you? When you're on retreat, it wasn't that they were holding it in. You know, you can sometimes sort of feel that, can't you? It was, I would have picked up on that. I would have noticed that fairly clearly on a retreat. But yeah, they seemed, as I say, to have nothing in common, but the communication between them belied that fact. They had somehow more in common than anything that I'd sort of seen until that point, more that it was closer than family. Yeah. So that's my second example. And I'm sure we've all had we've had just sort of glimpses of this, our own sort of glimpses of this, but it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing when you see human beings sharing what's most essentially human, getting beyond the difference of temperament, of, you know, opinion, ideology, and just being humans together. So I'd say that actually is pretty rare in our world these days. To that degree, certainly, I'd not seen anything quite like it up until that point. There's so much, isn't there, that kind of that purports to bring us together. But actually, if you look more closely, it brings a small grouping together and divides them against another grouping that perhaps aren't present at the time. But that's actually what's going on. I mean, you know, Arthasiddhi was talking about the politics at the moment, sort of what's going on, politicians trying to sort of reach people, speak broadly to people, and doing that through finding the lowest common denominator, fears over immigration and that sort of thing, which can speak to a lot of people, can't it? But it divides, it's partial, it's speaking partially. Much easier to do than find a voice that can speak impartially. Very difficult thing to do. I think it's a very rare thing. I suppose another example of this in the world is just this idea that happiness, we're going to find happiness through discovering our true sort of separate identity. That sort of thing, that actually if we just sort of if we can just sort of really identify what is our identity, often sort of linked with kind of race or gender or sexuality, that's where true happiness is going to kind of come from, which of course there's something in that, isn't it? It's an important aspect, but again, just noticing how that can divide us off as Sangha, sometimes quite quite sort of dramatically get these flare-ups. But it's another sort of example of just how rare actually something that can speak impartially in our modern world is. So continuing with this question of how does the Dharma speak impartially, and following actually Sangharakshita's lecture here, he draws out that the way the rain is talked about, the word used to describe this rain is eka rasa, one taste. Rasa means taste, and eka is one, which is the same term used in another parable, the parable of the qualities of the ocean, as evoking the qualities of the Dharma. And eka rasa, the Buddha is saying that just as the mighty ocean has but one flavor, the taste of salt. Everywhere you go, if you scoop up a little bit of water, it will taste salty. So too, my teaching has but one taste, the taste of freedom, the taste of freedom, the taste of complete freedom from conditioning, from separate identity. So that's really interesting, isn't it? How can that be when, you know, there's the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and the this and the that and the Mahayana and the Hinayana? He's saying there's something more essential than the doctrines and the practices to the Dharma. And I thought I'd just read Sangharakshita talking about this. So when we read about Buddhism, it's very important not only to remember this, but to try really to feel it. Otherwise, all our studies and knowledge will be in vain. When we read the scriptures or hear about the Buddha's teaching, it is not enough just to pay attention to the words, the ideas and concepts. What really matters is to feel through the concepts, through the images and symbolism, that which informs and gives life to them all. The experience of emancipation from all conditions whatsoever. In other words, we are trying to feel, at least to some degree, the absolute consciousness of the Buddha, the enlightened consciousness from which all the teachings originally came. So that's what this one taste is about. Yes, there are different teachings, and you may be attracted to one, and someone else may be attracted to another, but it's not really in the doctrine, if you like, that we meet. It's actually in this kind of taste, this taste of emancipation, this taste that we actually can grow free from our conditioning. That's really where we meet, and that's where we start to get a sense of Buddhism. Yes, we need to sort of get to know the doctrines. We need to get to know the teachings, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the Three Jewels, etc. But actually, he's saying we need to, and similarly the parables. But we need to sort of sense behind the words, get a sense of this taste of freedom. So, just checking how we're doing for time. So, yeah, I think in the groups, what I want to ask you is kind of where do you do that? What is it? What are the conditions that kind of put you in touch with that taste of freedom? But we'll come to that in a bit. But that's hopefully sort of answered this question kind of about the impartiality of the Dharma. It's seeing beyond the ideas, the doctrines, the parables, to sense kind of what is more essential to the Dharma, an actual experience of growth. And that's there, of course, in the parable, the plants and trees growing free. But what's noticeable to me is this this kind of open, expansive vision of impartiality, of sort of all that in potential all human beings can kind of participate in. We shrink back from that. We kind of shrink from it, and seek shelter. Seeking shelter, we sort of make of the hovel of our current mental states a home. We kind of shrink. It's kind of too vast for us to stay with. You can get a sense of that, can't you? I mean, going on retreat is a classic example. You go on retreat, you're uplifted, you're in touch with that big vision of the Dharma. You come home, you're still in touch with it, and then before you know it, you're kind of much more interested in the world and Netflix or whatever it is. You've kind of lost touch with it. We kind of shrink back from it. We don't even notice that we've done it. It's not even something to feel is an error, because it's sort of built into, it's a natural reflex of having an identity. That is the reflex of identity, to kind of shrink back and start to identify with our immediate experience, rather than being open to this sense of possibility of the enlightened mind. So yeah, we just sort of, we feel the need for some sort of some kind of security, kind of to build a smaller home that we identify with, but that only serves to restrict our growth and to divide us off. For example, into schools. I think Dharmasidi is going to talk more about this aspect of sectarianism next week. So yeah, as I say, of course, we're going to do this. This is just sort of built into what it is to have an unenlightened mind. So in a way, we want to just sort of expect this to happen. We will sort of appropriate the Dharma, kind of turn it into a possession, an ornament, put it on the mantle piece in our little hovel. And even when we're meditating, we don't entirely escape from this. We sort of settle down, don't we, into our current mental states. we sort of get sort of focused on them, preoccupied with them, and in so doing, actually kind of hang on to them. I don't know if you've seen yourself doing this in your mind. We actually sort of get attached to the things that we're supposedly trying to change and transform. And that also is understandable that we're going to do that. I mean, after all, we need to start from where we are. That's what we know with the Dharma. It starts from where we are. So we've got to do this I won't say tricky, but amazing thing really with the Dharma, whereby we are focused on our current experience, our current mental states. We need to acknowledge all that, but we do that within an openness to the possibility of that all completely changing. And openness is the word, because our craving mind, our ordinary everyday mind, kind of can't do that. Our ordinary everyday mind kind of wants to be there. But no, that it might not all change in this meditation. So if we're kind of wanting it to change, we're not actually being open. So that's what we need to do, to both be able to see what's going on in our immediate experience, and also have this openness to the possibility that that could all change. It might not, but it could. And that changes our relationship with the particulars of our current mental states. They then are all provisional. We don't sort of settle down. We don't create a home. We don't say, this is me. We don't say, this is mine. That all starts to shift. And that is, that's the perspective of the Dharma in every practice, really, when we're studying, when we're meditating, when we're practicing ethics. We're doing it within this openness to the possibility of the enlightened mind. So, yeah, just to conclude, if we can do this, if we can actually practice in this way, open to the reign of the Dharma, it's not just that we grow. Actually, we bring, we too, in some subtle or not so subtle way, we bring into the world something that is a source of impartiality. We will actually bring that into the world through our own practice, something that is so rare. So it will affect other people. That is the nature of the Dharma. So we too, if we practice in this way, will participate in the great rain cloud of the Dharma.